Good. That was Catriona who's setting up the PowerPoint, and I'm Kevan Martin. And so I'm going to begin by talking a little bit about the first of two projects that we're involved in, which is the Nature Recovery Network, which is a community-based sort of parish level project. And then Catriona will be talking about the Thames Valley Wildflower Meadow Restoration Project, which is a project that is a landscape scale project that is sort of centered on the meadow that you're looking at the moment, which is where we're talking to you from. So this is a local wildlife site called Longmead. And this is an ancient wildflower meadow, a Saxon meadow, 1,000-year-old plus meadow that we farm here. Just you see Whiteham Wood behind us on the hill. So the title is this, Nature Recovery, Networking from the Bottom Up. And just to give a bit of background, the place we began was really with a map, and the map was a map, a Google stitched together map of Eynsham parish and surrounding parishes. And we put it up in a local shop in Eynsham and asked people, this was in 2019, asked people to put a pin in the place that they love to be, love in nature. And it might have been in the village itself or in the environs, and asked them also what they would like to see improved, or what new nature could be created. And so on the basis of that, we decided then to have a meeting of interested people, people who are interested in nature recovery. And we leafleted all the houses in Eynsham village. And then on a dark stormy night in mid-January 2020, 250 people turned up to discuss nature recovery and what we could do about it. And so that was really the start of our local nature-based nature recovery network. And just to emphasize, it's not a network of places, it's really a network of people. So I come from academia, and my expertise is really looking at brain circuits and artificial intelligence. And in the academic environment, as with pretty much every organization you look at, the organization is hierarchical. And so you've got this very clear organogram of where you sit in the hierarchy and what the pecking order is. And so the CEO sits at the top and the underlings right down at the bottom, who are actually usually doing the business, and then middle management and so on. And pretty much every organization, NGOs, academia, corporations and so on, have this kind of structure. And there are two major problems when it comes to implementing this in any kind of nature recovery network. And that is really communication vertically, very difficult if you're down at the bottom to talk to the CEO. And there's also huge difficulty in communication laterally. And so often you may not even know what your neighbor has sent to BTO records office. Somebody in BTO knows it, but you don't know what your neighbor is seeing in their garden. And so the idea really was to come to a different kind of structure. And this really comes out of a long-standing idea of these small world networks, where you really are talking neighbor to neighbor, and you're trying to make the communication as paths as short as possible and make them as efficient as possible. And so the structure of our nature recovery network is really as flat as we can make it. And as it said at the beginning, really bottom up. So not top down CEO telling people what to do, but really communicating on a flat, plain, flat level. There's no or minimal hierarchy. And the important thing there is to inject into this network experts. And so the experts we will talk about a bit more about, but in these kind of small world networks, you have really high global efficiency of communication and very high local efficiency of communication. And the experts then are plugged in so that they know more than 6 degrees of separation. That's a sort of standard term in the small world network field. And so the idea really is bottom up, highly connected, very efficient communication. And this is reflected in the logo of our Nature Recovery Network. And so here we just show, for example, some of the players in here. And I should say that as we've sort of moved through the last 2 years of experiencing lockdown and having this network in operation, it's become increasingly clear that a really major role is in education, both at an adult level and right at a school level. And Catriona will be talking a bit more about the school level. And the point is that we understand, all of us, that this nature decline that Henrietta pointed out right at the beginning is something we all know. And we all know that we're the ones that are causing it. And so what we find is that it's usually not willful, it's simply through ignorance, that we don't understand the consequences of the things that we do. And so increasingly large part of our program in the Nature Recovery Network and in the Thames Valley Wildflower Restoration Project is really education. And so the business that you see here is really to connect as many of the different players and plugging them in to workshops and local experts and so on, who can convey formally and informally their knowledge. As I said, I'm really interested in brains for a long time, and you'll notice that the structure of the tree resembles a human brain. So one of the other critical things that we found in developing this flat network is that it's really useful if you can find someone or some people who can serve the critical function of being a hub. And what a hub is in these networks is a node, a kind of one of the little points in the connected network that really has a high number of connections. And I have to say that the person sitting next to me is one of those people who serves this kind of critical function, because they start to connect. So if somebody comes in and says, what about X? They know who the person is that will give the answer. And so this connecting people to people is really a critical part of this. And it's much, much easier to do if you don't have a hierarchical structure in the organization, but a very flat structure, so people don't feel embarrassed about knocking on a door and asking a question. So in that sense, we've tried to identify through the parishes as many different local experts as we can. And of course, some of those are professional environmentalists, but many are, as Henrietta said at the beginning, the residents which have, historical knowledge of the landscape and their local landscape and the wildlife that lives there. And so, somebody that knows where the lizards used to live on the dry stone wall and actually gave them names when they were children, and 70 years on can tell us where that place is, and we can go and look and see if the lizards are there. And so there's a huge range of kind of latent knowledge that sits in every community. And by creating this network, we can tap into that knowledge. And this is just a photograph of one of the kind of walkabouts we've done with some of these people. An important kind of component of that group of local experts, of course, are the local farmers who actually are on the land. And again, we find a fount of important kind of historical and current knowledge. So the local experts are the people who are helping us with community surveys and mapping. And we collect that together on a website, which we've created, this naturerecoverynetwork.org website. Fabulous website, I should say. Please go and look at it. And here's an example of one of the surveys we've been doing, which is of reptiles, and this is in the churchyard. And you see there Neil Clennell, who's CEO of the Witchwood project, telling us what we should be doing. And what we find is that people are hugely enthusiastic to get involved. And one of the caveats, of course, is that in citizen science, we call it science, but in fact, as a scientist, there are many things that citizen science does which one wouldn't call very scientific. And so this is another reason really to try and connect together experts really across the board to raise the kind of competence of the people who are doing the surveys. So here we see again Neil again, and the local network, of course, can connect to these environmental NGOs, and that's another critical role of the network, to tap into the specialist expertise that exists in the NGOs. And so our surveys, including trees and water quality, botanics, bird surveys. The picture of the people with binoculars is a swift survey that goes on in the village. There we looking under a tin for slowworms and grass snakes. And right at the bottom, connecting to the hedgehog, that's the territory that we've mapped in the local village in creating a hedgehog superhighway. And those are the places in brown where we've no hedgehogs exist. So all of these kind of data are brought together in a local database, and this is a really critical part of the network, is really to make information locally available. So during lockdown we did garden surveys, probably many people did, and that could then be plugged into a map like this. This is about 40 surveyors doing things, and if you clicked on our website onto the icons, you actually got a list of what people were seeing and the week that they were seeing it. So we had a system where every Sunday people would go out for half an hour into their garden and just observe. And the point is really what I said in the little text there is raising consciousness is really critical, and stimulating curiosity. I think that's another mammoth part of it. And so this nature recovery network is the thing that we then are able to connect to into landscape scale and bring the landscape also back into the village in our restoration projects, which I haven't said anything about, but planting hedgerows, creating meadows in the village and so on is one of the major activities that then also comes out of it. But the point of the surveys is really look before you leap, and often that turns out not to be an adage that's followed. So Catriona now is going to go on to talk about the Thames Valley Wildflower Restoration, Meadow Restoration Project.
So going back to this is Longmead, MG4 grassland. So we only have 4 square miles of this habitat left in the UK, an area the size of Heathrow Airport. So we have owned this for 20 years. I've been managing it and farming it, and then also leading, having school visits. And I do something called care farming, which is working with adults with learning disabilities and autism. So in 2018, when Kevan returned from working abroad, we decided we would try and see if we could extend this habitat. So of this tiny fraction that's left, there's a significant proportion on the Thames between, so this is at Swinford, on the Thames between us and Oxford. Of course, many of you probably know the Pixie Mead, Eynsham Mead, Cassington Mead. So this is us here. Can you see my cursor? That's Longmead here, and then downstream you've got Cassington Mead, Eynsham Mead, Pixie Mead, and then further into Oxford the new Marston Meads here, which were all triple SIs. And so we rather boldly wondered if we could try and at least start by connecting us up with the triple SIs downstream. So the project has emerged as really like a kind of field by field jigsaw of trying to connect a connected meadow network. And again, with this bottom-up approach, working neighbour to neighbour to neighbour and to their neighbour. And it's a long-term, we kind of, we think of it as a long-term goal, because of course, if you're going and knocking on somebody's doors and saying, can I restore your meadow, it's not really very different to if you go knock on, our door in our terraced house and saying, can I rewild your garden? So it's a very much a kind of slowly approach, with neighbours kind of connecting to each other, and we do seem to be knocking on open doors. So this is all very exciting, but before I go to talk about the restoration, in 2020, the Floodplain Meadows Partnership, who we are also working with, did a piece of research on all the restoration that had taken place in the last 30 years, and found that there was only a 25% success rate. And at the same time, Alison MacDonald and Ben Woodcock at CEH have produced another piece of research that suggests or predicts that it takes 150 years for the majority of species to colonize, although they are a bit more encouraging, saying that in 50 years the functional traits would emerge. So in this context, before I go and talk about our restoration, we should just, I think, dwell a little bit on the Hingsi Meadow here, which is a local wildlife site, and these adjoining meadows, which aren't designated at all, but look like this. So these are the meadows around the Hingsi local wildlife site that have all the fragments of MG4 grassland. And if there was anywhere in this part of Oxfordshire that you might want to create a connected meadow network, it's there. And of course, with 4 square miles left, these meadows are as rare as Stonehenge. And if it were an animal, we would probably be creating a national park to preserve them. But as we know, they're threatened by the Oxford Flood Alleviation Scheme. So this is the network as it looks like in the meadow restoration project. Similar idea, so local connections of experts, landowners and community members. So these are the people we're working with so far: the Open University with carbon research, Oxford Brookes. We just started a new project. But so again, just as Kevin said, this area, the local knowledge for us is also really important. The farmers who have born and brought here. What we realise is part of the reason why these meadows haven't been protected is that they're actually a lost culture. They're lost agricultural culture and also in the community. Nobody's seen these meadows, and farmers think that there's no value in them, that you can't sell the hay because they're not as rich as silage, which is true. But if you talk to the number of farmers who have them, and of course you can count them on one hand, they know absolutely where they fit into 21st century agriculture. So that's why engagement education comes back to be the key. So the meadows that we've restored in the villages obviously are tiny in comparison to the 100 acres or so that we're restoring in the landscape, but are really important from the education point of view. So this is collecting seed from Longmead with a forage harvester. We use the green hay method, i.e. we collect the hay and chop it up and spread it on the recipient fields. I'll talk briefly later on about our invertebrate studies. What's interesting in this, and that isn't really on the radar, is that there is potentially the possibility that you're actually at the same time transferring invertebrates to a new site, which obviously if you use a commercial seed mix you're not going to do. The other important thing is, of course, we're transferring very locally from one meadow to another, so the local provenance is important there. So this was doing Christchurch Meadows in 2020. Merton College came to us last year, and we've done 2 meadows opposite the Marston Meadow Triple SIs last year. And then this is Pink Hill. So between 2021 and 2023, we are going to be doing 90 acres here. The first year of this was funded by ECOVER in a partnership with the Open University and BBOUT. And then this is we restored 1.6 acres of, or created a meadow in the playing fields in Eynsham, which actually also happens to be floodplain. And there are two streams that the Chill Brook and another brook here crosses it. So it's a beautiful example of a floodplain meadow, and of course has allowed fantastic community engagement. So learning by doing, our baseline survey before we did the restoration. This is Alison Muldow, who many of you probably know, recently retired from Natural England, who is leading the community surveys. And we had 25 people, picture doesn't show, but we had 25 people doing the baseline survey, and we've repeated those since. And now this year, the group is going to do the Ashmolean Natural History Society's foundation course. So the idea being that over 10 years, we can build up a really expert group of local surveyors that can go start working on our big meadow project as well. So here's Frances Watkins of the Ashmolean Natural, who runs the course, and she and her Corallian group are doing the botanical surveys for our Thames Valley restoration project. This is the niece of the landowner whose meadows at Pink Hill we're restoring. She just finished a degree in an MSc in conservation, so she was doing work experience with us, and has just got the reserve for a job with 150 applicants to queue for a similar project that they're running in Kent. This is the Christchurch baseline survey at Christchurch. Again, so this is John James, who's the head gardener of Christchurch, a fantastic person. And literally, I just went to him and said, you know, we're starting this project. How about restoring Christchurch meadows? And he said, yeah, brilliant idea. And went to the garden committee, and they think he's wonderful. So whatever he says goes, and that's how it happened. And then Stephen Harris here, who's the professor of plant sciences, who's at Christchurch, came and joined in with the surveys. Also brought in James Penny, who's from the botanical gardens. And so again, another kind of coming together of communities. And now Stephen is going to use the meadow as it's in the process of restoration for his students. Historically, they went off, drive off to Wales for 2 days to do their field work, but now they can do them actually in the meadows. And what he says is that it's really, it's fantastic because they can go and do it on their own. Of course, they're not the travel costs and all that kind of thing. So this is a project with the Floodplain Meadows Partnership at the Open University, looking at carbon storage in floodplain meadows. This is funded in the next 3 years again by the ECOVER grant with BBOUT and us. The preliminary research suggests that even in the first 10 centimetres of floodplain meadows, the carbon storage capacity is greater than under any other land uses. And our first year data suggests that actually they're like to be as good at storing carbon as peat bogs. Also interesting is that there's a notion that increased biodiversity increases the capacity of floodplain meadows to store carbon. So the project is actually looking at carbon storage under meadows of different levels of restoration. Of course, the other thing to say about storing carbon in the soil is that it's much more secure than carbon storage in trees. It's not affected by ash dieback or wildflowers. So here you see, this is a fantastic graphic done by the OU, and just look at 3 meters. Look at the depths of the roots that draw the carbon down. So Centaurea niger, the black knapweed with roots almost down to 3 meters, and Sanguisorba officinalis, the great burnet, which is the indicator species with fantastically long roots. So we're also looking at the relationship between plant and invertebrate diversity, which and so we're connected up with the Global Malays Programme, which is run out of Canada, and they are looking at invertebrate diversity by testing of DNA, which of course gives you presence or absence, but doesn't tell you quantity. We're also working with Mike Wilson from the National Museum of Wales and Ryan Mitchell here, who was until recently at Oxford Natural History Museum. Mike's a hopper specialist and Ryan is a fly specialist. And so we're also looking, so Mike's wanting to do a species list of longmead as the kind of gold standard, and then looking at over time, and again this is a long-term project, how invertebrates increase or don't increase in the meadows that we're restoring. Ryan, who's just starting off, made a great find on longmead in 2020. He found a very rare fly called Sarcophaga villeneuvae, which has only been found on 8 other sites in the UK. And was first identified, this is it in the Natural History Museum, it was first identified on Yarnton Mead just around the stream in the 1930s, so he was very excited. And then so connecting up all these communities, the professionals, the community people, the farmers, and that's one of our really key missions. We've been at quite a lot of the kind of county level meetings discussing nature recovery networks, and it's always very apparent to us that one really important community, which is the farmers, are not at the table, and their knowledge is absolutely critical to the debate, and they need to be there when at the outset, not herded into hotels in Milton Keynes as focus groups. So this brings together, this was a workshop we had with Charles Flower, who's one of the pioneers of meadow restoration from seed. And here we had 5 college gardeners, 3 or 4 farmers, and then community members here, and then NGOs here. You might recognize the back of Rachel Sanderson here, and I think Lucy was there too. I can't remember now.
1 minute left.
1 minute, okay. Another way of connecting up community, this is our care farming. So a lot of the seeds are very slow growing and don't always establish well from the green haymix. So we propagate them by hand. And this is where there's a lovely connection between our adults with learning disabilities and our community members. So this is learning to collect the seed, one of our care farming participants. And then we're doing data collection of the germination rates and propagation and growing times of the seeds themselves. And then actually planting them out, recording where we've planted them out. And if you click on any of these spots, you get the whole list of where the seed was collected, when it was sown, how it germinated, and so on. So more learning there. This was to test your knowledge of seedlings, but I can send it to you separately. The beavers planting out the plants grown by our care farming participants in the churchyard. So one of the mothers said that when they went to church every Sunday, the children then dragged them out into the churchyard to see how their plants was getting on. So a lovely, just immediate connection with the nature. A project just starting up, a nature recovery network in the 7 schools of the Eynsham Partnership Academy. So again, the same idea of connecting up the teachers with local experts and community members in each village who can help them establish projects. And then wild arts, connecting ecologists and community artists. Bob Cowley, I see, is in the audience. He did our first very fantastic workshop on tracks and signs that was followed by Alice Walker, who is running the art side of this, doing a work on ceramics. And then probably that was a nice piece of video of art in the meadow, but we'll probably leave that. And that's all the wonderful people who we're working with and who've supported us. Thank you.
Thanks, Catriona and Kevan. That's really inspiring. It's really interesting to see such a wide variety of people and organisations that you're managing to get involved in this network and be able to share that communication across them. I think the different projects and the areas really are testament to how that's working. So I think we can all learn quite a lot from that approach. I had a couple of questions that have come in. Cameron Miller was asking on the meadows that you're creating, are they cut at a similar time, or is the maintenance staggered?
So the maintenance of them is actually left to the landowner.
Okay.
The ongoing maintenance. Obviously, we can't be cutting everybody's hay for the next 30 years. And mostly they're farmers who, most of the meadows that we have done, and some are arable, but mostly they are existing land that's either cut for silage or sometimes even hay. So they're part of the agricultural system. It's just increasing the diversity of the grassland, essentially. So it's not the landowners don't know how to manage them. The management is the traditional management of taking a hay cut and then grazing the aftermath.
And do those end up being varied over time to help encourage sort of earlier and later flowering plants? Is there an influence on the sort of the community that ends up being built there by those times of cuts?
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, to an extent, because it's really important that they remain part of commercial agriculture. Otherwise, they're not sustainable. That is a compromise. I mean, before the advent of the tractor, of course, they would be cut from the middle of June to the end of July because it took that long. But as soon as you could do it with a tractor, it gets cut at a particular length of time, as does our meadow. And actually, you know, it survives very well on a hay cut sometime at the beginning to the middle of July.
So one should say that pretty much all the 120 species of plant that live on these floodplain meadows are perennial. So only 1 or 2 yellow rattle are annual, and so the most of them don't need particularly to reseed. Yellow rattle obviously does, but they are perennial plants, and so they go on. But the important thing, just in terms of this particular conference, is that as we find pretty much across the board, whether you're looking at rivers or meadows or forests or whatever, the data historically is extremely patchy, and both in time and place. And so the last time Longmead was surveyed before we arrived in 2000 was in the 1980s.
1978.
1978, yeah. And so this is a real problem in terms of particularly Henrietta's idea of the shifting baseline syndrome is actually knowing what was there. And so the historical records that TVERC has, I think, are absolutely a goldmine of information. And so we're also trying to get Stephen Harris, who's, you know, curator of the herbarium, to let us into his records, because around Oxford, of course, people were wandering out and recording stuff from I think their earliest record is in the 17th century. So these are really important issues, and ones that we're very interested in, the whole historical evolution of these meadows. And in the face of climate change, of course, these are the meadows that are the most resilient. They're the most stressed environments, and the ones most likely to survive.
Well, actually, also when thinking, being at TVERC, if you're ever doing any spring cleaning, this survey that was done for Longmead in 1978 was an amazing survey that was done by Judy Webb when she first joined MAF. and she cycled all the way up the Thames, doing surveys of all the meadows between here and Chimney, and produced this fantastic map. And then at some moment, a long time ago, handed over the data to TVERC. And the only actual survey that remains is the survey of Longmead, which is why we know we know, for example, that in the 1978 we had Devil's Bit scabious, and we don't anymore. But all the other surveys, for some reason, have got lost. So if you're ferreting around in back drawers and cupboards,
yeah, no, we'll keep an eye out for those. Anything we can find. Thank you. I had one other brief question. Again from Cameron. He was wondering if you could suggest any further reading on the higher species diversity in a meadow that helps increase that carbon storage.
So is it possible he could just send us an email, and then we can supply him? The other person who's a fount of information on this is Professor David Going at the Open University, who's sort of leads the Floodplain Meadows Partnership. And I have to say, he is absolutely filled to the pores with useful information. So every time we meet, I learn a huge amount. But we can certainly supply some literature.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks very much for answering those questions, and thanks again for sharing all of what you've been doing with us. It's really great. Thank you.